Good afternoon to all of you. Good afternoon, very warm welcome to all of you who are not sitting in the sun outside on a terrace, who are not plunging in the water, who are resisting this warm and humid afternoon and are with us at this SPY 25 event. A very warm welcome also to the 4 speakers of today, who I will introduce in a minute. My name is Odo Veldhuis. I am a professor in economic and cultural sociology here at the University of Amsterdam, and I will be moderating this event today. The event is on the occasion of the publication of a monograph on other terms interfering in social science English. I will show the monograph to you here. So this monograph, it has actually been published already a year ago, but because of COVID, it took a little while before we organized this event. And the monograph thematizes the dominance of English as the academic language in at least the social sciences. And I think it's something that we are all aware of, but for some reason, we don't talk that much about, not explicitly at least. We take it for granted. It is almost like the big elephant in the academic room. And now we are going to talk about that big elephant. And that big elephant, it manifests itself in a wide variety of ways. For instance, I mean, just very simply, that so many of us in academia really cannot read, understand, follow, be up to date about what is going on in their own field, because we are not able to speak the languages in which so much that is written and researched. We don't speak those languages. It manifests itself in the fact that in the Netherlands, in many fields, it has become almost impossible to build an economic or an academic career by just writing in Dutch. It manifests itself in current discussions about decolonizing the curriculum, which is hard for many reasons. But one of the reasons is that we don't have the possibility to read in Portuguese or Spanish or French. And those would be the colonizers' languages. Think of that. We don't even know the colonizers' languages, let alone local languages, the languages of the colonized, indigenous languages, which makes it so hard to bring in those perspectives into courses, the courses we teach, but also into our research, unless the people are publishing in English, of course. And that is also the experience that many of us will have when we go to conferences, where we may feel slightly ashamed that we are not able to speak English as well as our native English speakers who we are sharing or going to a conference with. So we start with a disadvantage to begin with. Now, this, of course, doesn't hold only for the academic world. It is applicable to any form of linguistic expression. I mean, think of fictional writing, think of music, think of traveling, or think of just talking to tourists in your own hometown. It's always on the other people's terms. But today we are going to talk about something a little bit more specific to academia. And that is, I think, in the end, the issue is that and you don't have to be an expert on semiotics here, or you don't have to be an expert on the saussure to be aware of the fact that how you know the world is intricately related to the language you speak. So the language determines what you are able to see, to understand, to talk about, to make sense of. And that makes the dominance of English so important to think about. The fact that if you are doing research in a language, or if your language is not English, that you always have to translate it into English to get your work published, to talk about it at conferences. So the terms of the debate, literally the terms, are English terms. And it is in that act of translation from your own local language to English that things inevitably get lost. The connotations or the semantic networks get broken, as Olga Zetsneva, who is speaking this afternoon, together with her co-author, Lyuba Chernysheva, put it so nicely in this volume. So what are the implications of this? What does this mean? And also, what can we do about it? That is what we're going to talk about this afternoon. And of course, I mean, we can get frustrated, we can get angry, we can complain, but hey, if we complain, to whom do we complain? We can get frustrated, but it will not change anything. And I think one of the things that is really, really special and nice about this book, and why I would highly recommend it to all of you to read it, is that it turns this anger or frustration, it turns it into something productive. It turns it into something creative exactly by thematizing it. So by thematizing this problem of translation, it turns it into something that is just inspiring and wonderful to read about. So we are going to talk about these issues with 3 of the people who made this book possible. I mean, there are many more authors in the book, but 3 of them are with us this afternoon, and they are with us also because they're all 3 working at the University of Amsterdam. The first is the editor of the book, Annemarie Mol, who is a professor of anthropology of the body, and she is the editor and also contributed an essay on the Dutch word schoon, in which, and I'm not just going to say one sentence about it, she demonstrates really nicely that it cannot simply be translated, the Dutch term schoon, into the English clean. Then afterwards, we will have Olga Zetsneva, who is an urban and cultural sociologist, and she is also well, here is another act of translation, actually. In Dutch, we would say she is an UD, an universitair docent, but to translate it into English is not that easy. I would say, or we, I think, agreed to say at the University of Amsterdam, associate professor, another act of translating the nomenclatura of academia. She will talk about the commons, the concept of the commons, and the limitations of that English term when doing research in commoning practices in Russia. Then we will have Amade Micharek, who is a professor in the anthropology of science, also here at the University of Amsterdam. And she will talk about the term haraga, the Arabic term haraga, which denotes people moving out of the Maghreb, and in particular in Tunisia, where I think Ahmad is also at the moment physically located. So they will give each a brief presentation of their contributions to the book, followed by a really quick Q&A, a question and an answer from the moderator, so that's me. Then we will have finally Vincent de Rooij, who is an associate professor also at the University of Amsterdam, and he will present a review of the book. And one of the reasons to ask him to give this review of the book is that he is specialized in linguistic aspects of culture. By then we will have a panel discussion, and there I would also very warmly like to invite all of you in the audience to give input. And as you can see, this is a webinar. It is set up as a webinar. So if you have questions, and I very much hope you do, then you can ask them through the Q&A. So push on the Q&A button and you can type in the question, and it will be, I will then just ask them to the panel members of this afternoon. So this is everything from my side by means of introduction. I would say, Annemarie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Olaf. I will give you a picture. There we go. I'll share my screen. So you've seen this picture already. This is the picture of the cover of the book On Other Terms. And what you can see on this cover is translations of the title. So John Law and myself, we were the editors. We asked all the authors, or sometimes 2 or 3 co-authors, to translate On Other Terms into their own languages. And then we put all those words and the sentences that they came up with on the cover, and you can see that it's not just different words, it's also different ways of writing and different scripts in various cases. we have, by the way, a small piece with everybody explaining their translation. And in that small, this collective piece, we passed it, our voices together. And in that collective piece, you can already see the kind of issues that Olaf just hinted at, in that there is no literal translation, that in each language, the translation evokes something different, puts another accent. And there is already, to begin with, this, it works in English, that on other terms is not quite in other terms. So in other terms would be to use other languages or other words, but on other terms is an English expression that also then means that let's do this in a different way. Let's not do this in the set and classic way. Now, in the introduction to this volume, we try to attend to issues of linguistic diversity in academia. It's an aspect of diversity that, as Olaf also already hinted at, is hugely important, but greatly under attended to. There have been people attending to it, of course, from various different corners, partly to do with the fact that in colonization processes, the colonizers often imposed their language on the colonized. But we hint at those in the introduction, but we also really try to focus on what this means here now in academia. And the problem, if you want to attend to something like that, is that, of course, you have to be in an attempt like that really aware of on which terms, on what terms, in which terms to do so. Because in one way, the word language is really helpful, but to attend to different languages, English, Dutch, Swahili, Spanish, Bangla, and so on. But in another way, there is a risk if you would just say this is a problem of language, that you go with an idea that language is somehow a free-floating system that can be separated from daily practices. And that resonates in the classic linguistic tension between what in French has been called langue, parole, language, words. So in this particular volume, we challenged all the authors to not talk about their language, but to talk about words in practices and to really be ethnographically specific about how the words they want to attend to, how they travel in particular sites and situations. Now, a second thing is there's quite some literature on translation, and indeed translation is going on here. If I think in Dutch originally or do fieldwork in Dutch and have to write in English, this shift is called translation, and a lot of the research on translation has inspired all of us. However, the specific situation of an author who's not a native speaker of English, who writes English, is not that we translate. I have to write in English, and that doesn't mean that I first think in Dutch and then write in English, but that I learn to write in English. But what that really means is if I were to write in Dutch, I would think of Dutch readers. And that translating what I write to Dutch readers into English wouldn't quite travel to Boston or Cape Town, etc., and so on. So when I write in English, I do not translate what I would say to Olaf or whomever here in Dutch, but it means that I already have to anticipate what might my readers in Boston or Cape Town, what might my work mean to them. Now, a third word that on the one hand is really useful to think about this issue, but on the other hand limited, is a wonderful word that travels, especially in anthropology, where of course there is a long tradition of attending to intranslatables, because anthropologists would go out to study people who were speaking other languages, and learning the language is part of the art. And one of the streams in anthropology says that it's really important to not pretend that one can translate the other language into the language of the anthropologist. And they use for this the word equivocation, which is to keep on attending to the gap between the language of the other and our language. But why this doesn't quite work in our case is that who is we and who is they? If I write about Dutch fieldwork, am I we anthropologists, we authors, or am I they the Dutch, or they the people in Amsterdam? And this goes for quite a lot of the authors that we've assembled in the volume, and also for quite a lot of current anthropologists and social scientists. A lot of us do work in another language, in another setting as English. And who do we write to? Who is we and who is they? That's part of the quest. So to give you a quick idea, I will not be able in the short time to go into all the articles, but I do want to give an overview here. So there's the introduction, there's the translating of a title, I mentioned that. There's a great piece from Brazil with the word saudade, and it's on migration. There's a piece from northern Norway, but more particularly from Sami setting, where the clash between the Norwegian language and the Sami language is attended to as giving rise to very different types of ideas of how land may be used. It's one of these places where colonization is still going on. Huh? Then there's a text about the commons that Olga will shortly talk about. There's a wonderful text I like a lot of Wen Yuan Lin about the word she, but that's not just about the word, but it's about the style of doing research. He's struck by the fact how so much academic work in English is in fighting mode. And what he proposes is to balance. Go and read it if you get suspicious. It's lovely. Endre Danyi has written about buskoma politics. It's a Hungarian word, and the idea is there how to do politics when it's really hopeless, but how to still do it. We have cows in Colombia. There is a piece that I did, as Olaf mentioned, on schoon. There is knowing in Chinese medicine. There's haraga that Amat will talk about. And the last text of the book is to warn the reader that if a word is not English or not Western, that doesn't immediately mean it's good. So this is about salmon trout theory, which was a Japanese theory that is on the one hand, the two authors think it's really interesting and promising, but it was also instrumental in Japanese colonization of its own northern islands. Good. So there's a lot to read. Have fun with it. I hope you do. And as Olaf said, the whole spirit of the thing is to not complain, but to invent and to show the richness of all the other languages. And so what we all have to offer, all these other terms to think with. Now, very short, my last remark. And I show you here the vies en schoon of Floddertje. And one of the things that I would like to illustrate in my piece on schoon, and how it's not just about translation, when I write about schoon in English, is that when I think of schoon, Annie Schmid, and I mean, for those of you who are not been in the Netherlands long enough, Annie Schmid is a Dutch children's author, and also she wrote a lot of stuff for adults too. But she wrote in a splendidly ironic way about the dreams of cleanliness of the iconic Dutch housewife that she tried to battle with as an icon, and also of the way children were educated. And I cannot escape that that's in my head, and that's how I frame issues of schoon. And that, of course, is not translatable, because when I write in English, that kind of cultural resonance is simply not there. So good. I think that was my 5 minutes, Olaf.
It was, Annemarie. Thank you so much for that. Annemarie, I have one short question that would probably require a very long answer, and we basically have only 1 minute for it. And that is this. I see among the participants in the session today quite a few people, PhD candidates, staff members who are doing research in different areas or who are native speakers, not in English. What would be one of the main takeaways for their own research, for them as practicing researchers from this book project that you have concluded?
It would be, don't allow English to block your thinking. Use all the linguistic resources you have to think. And don't think, oh, I cannot write this because I cannot do it in English. First think it, and then start to play what you can and cannot move around. But trust yourself. Don't get demoralized by thinking, oh, I'm not good enough in English. Of course you're not. Well, too bad. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
That's really super, and even less than a minute. You see how quickly you can give advice to researchers. So I would like to give the floor to Olga Zetsneva, who will continue with her presentation on commoning in the commons.
Thank you very much, Olaf. And I also want to thank a lot Anna-Marie and John Law for inviting me to participate in this project. You know, we often just kind of toss under the rug all kinds of issues of translation. In the best case scenario, we put a little footnote saying that this word could translate this way, but also 5 other ways, but I'm going to stick with this one particular meaning in my analysis. And this book, this invitation gave me and Luba, also, as you see her name here in the title, Lyubov Chernysheва, an opportunity to really think beyond simply translating and finding a good equivalent. A little bit of a background story here. Luba is writing her PhD currently, and her interest is in commons or commoning. And she brought this fantastic ethnographic material to me and Olaf, which was so rich and which kind of resisted the definition of the word common or commoning, right? So the concept itself was just too tight. It was not doing justice. And, you know, there are serendipities all around us. Anna-Marie called us and said, why don't you write something reflecting on this situation and work out exactly how the word commons can be extended, can be stretched in the research practice done in Russia. So our article is an ethnographic study of the Russian word общее, and общее is a corpus of phenomena pertaining to communal life in Russia. And you can imagine how rich, given the history of Russia and the Soviet Union, this communal life is. So similar to the word, English word commons, Russian общее marks the zone of the communal or public, that is everything that is collectively shared in a number of different ways. And as I already mentioned, the research, the material comes from Luba's research in St. Petersburg in 2 specific places. One is a large-scale, newly constructed housing complex in the peripheral zone of St. Petersburg. And here you see, you have a picture of this area. Now, this is a community which comprises approximately 70,000 people. In the Netherlands, it's a town, right? They live in 33 high-rises, 29 stories high, each of them. The second community that Luba looked at resides in a very different type of neighborhood, very different type of housing. And it represents a well-known trend in Russia of forming small communes of collective living. As a rule, there are 6 to 15 tenants, and they share a large rented flat. Spaces are equally shared, and decisions have to be made collectively. In this decision-making, all residents participate. So both communities practice active communication concerning rules, norms, expectations, and they have a strong appeal to what's good for public, what's good for the collective, and what this collective is. And there is an interesting interplay between privacy or privatization and privatist tendencies that both of these places try to offset by using different types of the word общее or common. So as I said, our journey started with us assuming that we look at an instance of commons, and the strikingly large body of literature in the social sciences today emerge around realities and domains as different as academic work, biodiversity, culture, ideas, scientific data, what have you, all identified as the commons. Yet it is rarely acknowledged that the commons is also a term which is more than very particular European culture, right? It's a early modern English property rights that is subsumed under this word. So when researchers revive this term, they clearly are driven by a very particular interest. They try to reimagine the conditions under which the commons can become the seed of a society beyond state and market, and a viable response to the ever widening privatization. Now, the word общее and everything that comes with it, everything that relates to it, in Russian is much broader. It relates to a much greater number of specific concerns. So we decided that why limit ourselves to a very particular question, why privilege a specific culture and its history, and make it again dominant in our analysis. So we went on examining what we called common places, места общего пользования, and these were in particular hallways and corridors. And here are examples of two common spaces that we examined with the question of what is common, what is общее, and how it is constructed. And I will try to give you, in my remaining time, two examples of how we did it and what we learned from it. So if you look at the left-hand side of the hallway in Placid Hollow, you see a pretty long, monotonous corridor. They usually go as long as 35 to 45 meters. It's pretty anonymous, right? It is a perfect общий corridor according to Russian housing law. Its square meters are equally distributed to and owned by all the occupants of a given tower. So in a way, it is a commons. But there is a widespread practice that exists in this type of settings that actually dates back to the Soviet time. People partition these corridors. They create enclosures, and they do that with the use of walls, locks, and keys. So they carve spaces that become accessible to maybe 4, 6, maximum 10 tenants, 10 occupants of 10 apartments. And so an enclosure is made in direct violation of legal rights of all other residents, homeowners in the building, but no one objects. Actually, as I said, it's a very common, much supported practice. And the question was, why is that? And when we looked and talked and analyzed communication that was happening around the partitioning of these corridors, what we discovered is that the enclosure produces a new social ontology. People call it Nash общий corridor, that is our common hallway. It is not just common, it is ours. So Nash here reduces the scale of the collective, right? It signals a particular proprietary relation between the subject and the object. It produces an emotional intimacy to it. Nash corridor is closer than simply общий corridor. Nash общий corridor mobilizes proprietary emotions even more and towards a greater sense of responsibility and collective care. And what we understood from this example is that by creating an enclosure in which words, things, and emotions work together, people respond to a common concern. They resist the disappearance of общее or common into nobodies, no ones, right? The basically annihilation or obliteration of the common. Now, if Olaf allows me to go to the second example.
No, really, Olga, because we're already past time, actually.
Okay, then I will say, hey, this article is in the book, and there are many more exciting examples, including the one how to eat a cake and have a cake and make it common for everyone. I just want to say maybe 2 sentences, few words in the conclusion. our claim is not to make общее a common, right? It's not to replace the commons in English language with the term общее and everything that it generates, but rather to say that, to show that общее sensitizes us very differently to much wider range of concerns that commons does. And given the current debates, I would even say semantic wars happening around the term commons in the social sciences, trying to understand what commons exactly is, we argue that actually we should not be doing this reductionist practice. Общее is a semantic web with a patchwork character, and actually it's great. We should not purify it, we should not forcefully introduce cohesion to it, but rather be sensitive and appreciative of this heterogeneity. And here I will stop.
Thank you so much, Olga. That was really wonderful and clear. And I'm sure the things that you're talking about and the networks of semantics, that we'll get back to those also in the discussion. I would like to give the floor to Ahmad Charek, who, as I think already mentioned, is in Tunisia at the moment and will be speaking about, well, not just a Tunisian term, but Ahmad, the floor is to you.
Thank you. Yes, I am in Tunisia. I'm in Zarzis, and this is also where I would like to take you with me to discuss this word haraga. Haraga, as you can see here also in Arabic, it is here everywhere. I mean, if I want to have a peace of mind, I drive to the beach nearby, I will be confronted with haraga. If I go to the neighbors to have a piece of a meal together, I'm confronted with haraga. Haraga is everywhere. People are moving. People are on the move, and usually by boats of sorts here. Now, in this chapter, and Anna-Marie, thank you for twisting my arm so gently to write this chapter. In this chapter, I want to I use the word haraga to do two things. First, to intervene in a discourse about migration and migrant death and border politics and what have you. And primarily because in this whole debate, it is often about the identities of people. Are they refugees? Are they economic migrants? Are they thugs? Are they traffickers? What are they? So this identity politics that comes with it, who to let in and who to stop, so to speak, which is implicated in this discourse. The other thing is that is often a discourse, which is immaterial. So I wanted to materialize, and this is how I did it. So while working with the word haraga to intervene in social theory, I also wanted to give it a more of a material base to it. So here you are with me in Zarzis, looking at a rock that tells you Aruba min hana, to Europe through here. It gives you direction where to go to. And it does so in almost a serious way, because people do indeed leave from here on boats, but at the same time it is also with a wink. There is the irony of the crown that is pasted on it, put on it as well. So there is more going on than just an index for a direction for where to go. Another material trace that I attended to, and I will come back to these pictures shortly, is you see here a truck that is leaving a company, Cotizal, that is here to the left, I don't know, like 10 times a day, to transport salt that is harvested here to the port of Zarzis, somewhere there, and to transport it to France usually. So we have different kinds of transportation, people living on boats and dinghies and what have you, feluccas, and we have here salt that is being transported on a daily basis. A kind of a colonial extraction, I would say. And then the other material object that I attend to in this chapter is an artistic configuration made by my friend and Mohsen Lihideb, who collects traces that wash up ashore, traces of environmental disasters such as plastic and what have you, traces of fishery, local fishery, but also traces of people that leave on these boats, and whether they make it to Europe alive or dead. That is, of course, a major question, but lots and lots of shoes and slippers and clothes and safety vests, as you can see here, is used by him in different kinds of artistic expressions here in his yard at home. And not a trivial, basta haraga, which is not a moral statement. This is a political statement about the systemic problem that is ongoing there, that makes people want to live to the center of the world, as it seems, the lure of Europe there. Everybody wants to go there, and is risky. So I thought how to present this complexity, because I want to weave things together. I don't want to put things apart. That is the main thing also that I find interesting about this word haraga. It allows me to do that, being in that place that is outside of Europe, that gives us a different perspective. And it is hard. So I thought I'd just take you to the conclusions of this chapter and go through them quickly with you. So how does haraga interfere in social theory? I'll just skip that one. So my first conclusion is haraga is quintessentially an activity that interferes with imagined relations between states and individuals. So not this state obeying migration, right? But it is really about burning borders, about not obeying the state and doing acting differently. Second, haraga is an activity rather than identity, as I said at the beginning. And I do that in that chapter by exploring the what needs to be done actually to move from Northern Africa to Europe. All the preparation work that is there, all the means that are important, the networks that are needed, the connections that you need to have to make it safely to Europe, the families here that are staying put and that are navigating, that are following your traces and also showing you, buying tickets for you online for you to take the bus somewhere in Italy and what have you. So that whole work that is implicated in it. Third, haraga is not about burning bridges. It is about crafting connections. It is about expanding living space. People want to be moving around. They don't want to be stuck in Europe, really. They simply want to be able to go back and forth. So this is really an important point. People don't want to leave the continent. They want to be able to move. My fourth conclusion is that haraga is also about colonial flows. Yes. Okay. This is a point about this colonial extraction that are ongoing. Here you see salt that is being transported on a daily basis very smoothly for colonial prices, right? Novel contracts have been drawn that allow this French company to take the resources as if we were living, like, let's say, 70 years ago or longer. My fifth conclusion is that haraga intervenes in the politics of borders. So, which is one that is trying to stop people, but it's also killing people, as we know. Many, many bodies that wash ashore. And haraga is a word that actually makes us attending to dead bodies at the borders of Europe and Africa. Let me see.
Matt, could I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
So that would be, and I know you talk about that in the article as well, but so listening to you, it seems like what you're talking about is quite close to terms in English or in Dutch, like undocumented migrants, ongedocumenteerden. And I know it is not the same, but could you explain what the exact difference between haraga is and what you could think of when you translate it? So terms like undocumented.
Well, that is precisely the point here, exactly, that if you attend to the word itself, so it is not about this identity of the undocumented or the documented migrant, so to speak, the one with the visa or the one without. It is really the practice of being on the move. And it is also a practice that immediately, because the conversations here about Haraga are immediately about what else can you do here? You know, what is left here for us to be doing? What are the perspectives here? So there is this politics of death, as I just mentioned, that is also connected to a politics of life and livability of the setting. So you see that, and this word is really sitting in the middle of that whole problematics, one could say. So, and I think undocumented migrants is such a legalistic approach, right? And it is attending to the kind of borders that we have and the kind of citizenship and who has rights to this citizenship. So you see how we are caught up in this identity that does not make it possible for us to think connections, basically, to think connections. And I'll leave it here, Olaf. I get the point.
I read basta.
Yes, basta, genau.
Yeah, also because I would really be curious to hear the thoughts and reflections of Vincent de Roy, who, as I already mentioned, is specialized in linguistics. I mean, as an anthropologist. So I would be really curious to hear how you read this book, Vincent.
Thank you, Olaf. And thanks, by the way, to the organizers for inviting me here. This is quite an exciting event, I think. A publication that is at the same time very urgent, but also very valuable. I was asked to do a review, but I was not given any instructions. So I thought, well, that's very nice. So I'm going to do whatever I like. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. At the end, I'm going to say a few words on what I think the possibilities could be that are preluded on in this book. But I would also like to start perhaps in a bit of a gloomy manner. This is saying a little bit about the section Polycloth Perspectives in Anthropological Quarterly that was initiated by Michael Hertzfeld in 2009 with the explicit aim to give more space in Anglophone anthropology to non-English ethnography. So not only people working in non-English speaking territories and countries, but also hearing from non-native speakers of English working as anthropologists in their own countries, for instance. And it's quite interesting to see that this whole endeavor seems to have withered away a little bit. So there hasn't been much activity on this front, and this points to a serious problem in publishing, I think. We are all part of big market structures, and one of the things I think we should be doing is create some alternative structures for putting out work like the book published here. Now, when I talk to colleagues and students about problems that have to do with language, I always go back to Malinowski and to especially to this book, Coral Gardens and the Magic, in which Malinowski does an extensive and a very thorough study of all kinds of spells that the Trobrianders used in gardening activities. And one of the interesting things really about Malinowski is that he doesn't see language as is common in linguistics, but as a practice, as an activity that is firmly rooted in not only talking, but all kinds of ritual contexts, social contexts, etc. So he talks about the translation of what he calls untranslatable words. And what he points out is that for him, the real linguistic fact is the full utterance within what he calls its context of situation. And by the way, I think that this is put into practice by the authors of the book, who have an enormous caring for words in context. And this is something that you very, very rarely see performed at this level, I think, in social science publications. So I'm going to show you a little bit just on the surface what Malinowski did, and I see some resemblances with some of the work in the book, but also differences. And the differences have to do with what I would call the more technical linguistic aspects of language use. So what Malinowski does in introducing these spells to his audience is give morpheme by morpheme glosses. So by doing that, he shows us what the structure of the Trobriand language is like. And this is something that we often do not see, is made invisible in a lot of publications, where people quote informants, but quote them in English, and in polished English at that. And what he also does, he not only gives these morpheme by morpheme glosses, but he also gives all kinds of rich annotations with these glosses. So it looks a little bit like this. I'm not going into all of these details, but he talks about he has linguistic commentary where he talks about the structure of words, or about time and aspect, coded on verbs. And then he has a general commentary in which he deals with sociological context, ritual context. He talks about the dogmatic, what he calls the dogmatic context, and the mode of recitation, which is how people perform these spells. So this is a really, really rich contextualization of these specific linguistic utterances. So the upside is that for the reader, this forces you really to dig into the whole process of situated meaning making. But the downside is, of course, that it is for many people too cumbersome to read, because people feel it requires some technical expertise that I don't have. So I'm just going to skip it. And this is, in fact, what often happens if I have students about this. So my cure, and apart from the praise I want to utter to all the authors of the contributions to this book, because I think they've done a marvelous job, and it resonates really with me, like the paper by Olga and her colleague, for instance, resonates with me and my own problems with the term belonging, which is all over the place in the English language literature. And I tried to use it in research in the Netherlands, and I was basically stuck. It's a no-go really, which is also interesting. But also, if you want to be part of the international community of people doing research like me in the countryside about all kinds of social issues, about how people feel connected to the landscape, etc., then you have to address belonging. But in fact, it does not always work with these hyped theoretical notions. So my cure would be to infuse English grammar with features from other languages and leave out all kinds of features from standard English that we feel are overdetermining or underdetermining. And then the result would be kind of happy ungrammatical English that also forces the native readers of English to do a little bit more effort, to make efforts to see what is actually going on. So I'll conclude by giving you two very, very simple examples. So this is from an article by Jack Sidnell, who did research in Guyana, in a rum shop. And he uses the Creole verb tak. He translates it in English as talking. So the reduplication of the original is maintained in English. And of course, this is not so-called grammatical English, but this is a way to show what is going on in, say, the original. And then I'll conclude with something from my native dialect of Dutch. When we ask someone politely to have a seat, you say, "Zet down." And this is really literally translated, "Put yourself." We don't even have this down direction, but just put yourself. And I think there's a very simple example to show the intricacies and the kind of detail that may be there in the use of particular words that totally gets lost in English. And I think it would be very interesting, not only as an experiment, but as a practice, as an academic practice, to start infusing English with new features. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent, and especially also for linking it so nicely to Malinowski and to classical anthropology. I would very much like to invite anybody in the audience to share thoughts, feedback, to maybe also share issues of translation that you have been running into in your own work, in your own research, and any questions that you may have for the audience members. In the meantime, I would be really curious to hear the thoughts of all four of you, just if the nature of the translation problems in your cases, if they are the same. So Olga with your obshea, Amaden with Haraga, Annemarie with schoon, if the issues that you have been running into in working with these terms, if they are the same, or if you can talk a bit about different types of problems related to the terms, the literal terms of the debate. And the same would hold for you, Vincent, if you link it, or if you think of the way Malinowski was struggling with this. Anybody would like to comment on this?
Yeah, let me start, if that's okay with you. I think there are endless lists of potential issues and concerns. And partly in editing this volume, we have looked for contributions that address different concerns. So if somebody carefully reads the whole volume, they will come upon lots and lots of examples. And to just give very simply the example of my own chapter on schoon, I already addressed two very different ones. For instance, the word schoon has all kind of aesthetic connotations. Schoon in Dutch means both what in English you would translate as clean and what you would translate as beautiful, especially in the eastern part of the country, etc. and so on. It doesn't matter. So there are these kind of semantic mismatches. And the second is the one I very shortly hinted at, is the resonances, that a word in a language also means what it means due to the whole literature of that language, due to the songs in the language, due to artistic productions, cultural productions, stories, etc. And those resonate within a word. And you can, I mean, however much you can translate a meaning of a word in a language, if you disentangle language, that kind of resonances in a word, you can try to sometimes explain, but you cannot translate them. And so, but the others can say what is, I mean, there are lots more specificities I could go into, but I would be curious to hear what the others would highlight.
Yeah.
Yes, I will reiterate the point of kind of the endless list, right, that emerges in different situations. And this list is not language specific. It's actually much more situated. It's practice specific. It's context specific. So for us, what was interesting is how people use obshea to reconfigure temporalities. to create discontinuities and breaks in something that in other situations may actually require constructed continuity, like something between the Soviet time and today. How also would different versions of Optia activate different affective registers and create different affective communities in situ? So there are different ways in which we can use and analyze and kind of harvest our research, our ventures on this topic. But I think what's important to me to mention here is that it really is looking at words, at language in practice, not simply, not still holding linguistic or discursive as a distinct realm, but understanding how these kind of merge, how they get mediated, and how also materiality participates in this mediation. So it's not between the language and reality, but it's much, much more and more complex. So it's against the separation of the social and linguistic.
Can I just, add briefly to this? I mean, this whole the value of the volume and also the exercise of working with words from different languages is, I think, not so much the issue of translation or non-translatability, but I think how to attend to words differently or as concepts, right? And to work with them methodologically, and you get then this richness that has already been addressed by Annemarie and Olja. So words do not become these representations of something, but rather tools or things to work with, and they unfold their richness precisely when you attend to them as concepts. And this is what we are good at doing as social scientists, I think.
Yeah, if I may quickly add something to this, if we talk about linguistic ideology, for instance, you could say that Western linguistic ideology, which has been dominating science for ages, is very much, kind of thinking in which we prioritize nouns over verbs. And this I found very, very interesting, for instance, in Amada, in your contribution, but also in the contribution about the Sami, which reminded me of some North American languages, for instance, in which the verb is all dominant. I mean, there are nouns, but the nouns are stuck to verbs, and they form a kind of very complex whole. And so this is something, I think, in Haraga, for instance, where you where you find it translated in Western news media, for instance, with illegal migrants or something like that, we have the tendency to immediately reify it in a noun instead of thinking in actions and in verbs.
Yeah. I would also like to bring in a couple of comments and questions from the audience. So first of all, Jeanette Pols, who is saying, and I think if I'm not mistaken, the audience members cannot read each other's comments and questions, so I'm reading them for you. So Jeanette Pols, who says that she finds the idea that Vincent mentioned of hijacking English grammar beautifully thought of. And Marieke de Goede is asking a question about her own research, which is on suspicious financial transactions and reporting on those transactions, where the issue would be that actually the same word is used. So a word or a term like a suspicious transaction, but what it means in practice is very different. So there might be the semblance of similarity, and people think that they might understand each other, but at the same time, the meanings that get attributed to the terms that are used are actually very different. And that is, and the question would be, is it something that gets addressed in the volume as well, or is it something you encounter in these in the chapters for this volume as well? Maybe first of all for Annemarie.
it's of course a true issue, and but it's not the one we address in this volume. I think there has been earlier work on that, and Marieke would do well to write a beautiful article about the different meanings of suspicious transactions. I think that would be grand, but that is another issue. I mean, it's a classic issue, and it deserves attention. But what we concentrate on in the volume is really this transition from other languages to English. But what comes with that, by the way, what we haven't brought across so far very much, is then also an attention to what kind of language do you want social science to be? And Vincent mentions that the possibility of playing with grammar. What various of the authors say is that they turn against the idea that you'd have stable concepts in English, because this whole fantasy that one should, as a scholar, stabilize one's concepts is a fantasy that is a remnant of a universalistic idea that we could have a universalistic science. And not nobody, but quite a few people wouldn't say that anymore, but they would still say we need to stabilize our concepts. But that always means an imposition of a particular genre of English on the rest of us. So, okay, English itself can be opened up and its word mean all kind of different things. And also, let's say in Delhi or in Dunedin or in Boston, English is also different. So English is not one, we shouldn't fix that. But now for Marieke, write that article, will be interesting.
We're looking forward to that, Marieke. Annette Vrijberg is asking, or is first of all saying that understanding language as practice, does that not also mean that translation is not something you do to a word or sentence, but it is an exchange between a speaker-writer and a listener-reader? And if so, does it still make sense to speak of intranslatables? So if you think about it more as a practice, would anybody like to reflect on that?
Well, maybe at this point we could also be more generous vis-a-vis the English language, right? So we could speak it together and understand each other. So that's nice. And I think this exercise that we are doing is also working productively because of the contrast between different languages and the English, right? So this thinking the English and in my case an Arabic word and thinking it's from different kinds of practices is actually what produces interesting thoughts, or at least with me, about the phenomenon. So yeah, so it is really, I mean, the aim was not about translating it or not translating it, or the limits of translation. That was not the starting point, and I think that this holds for actually almost all the chapters in the book.
That's also
it's really about contrasting.
Why we call it interfering in English.
Yeah.
So indeed,
yeah,
talking about intranslatability is a stepping stone. It's helpful, but the point is not translation. The point is interfering.
And maybe also another way to address this issue that Annette raised. All the contributions come from ethnographic work. This is the method that we use. This is the type of engagement with the world that actually made this conversation possible, made us, enable us to see these interstices, these extras. So here, probably we also can look at what ethnography is from a speaker-writer, listener-reader point of view, what type of engagement it necessitates, and how that engagement becomes the condition of writing on this topic.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because in all of these contributions, it's not just language, but also the whole materiality of the context and focus on process, really. And I think, by the way, this is also in linguistic anthropology and social linguistics, is the way to look at language. And many people, even in anthropology, have sometimes a bit of a distorted view of what linguists are doing. But I think what is happening here in this volume does a lot of justice to how language and communication and meaning making is conceptualized and theorized in large parts of linguistic anthropology and social linguistics.
But just Vincent, I agree with that. Of course, we build on that and we draw on that. But I think the specific case that we have in the volume is that we are not interested in the language of the other, which was the classic case of the linguistic anthropologist, but that we're addressing the language of academia itself and try to interfere with that. Using, of course, the theoretical insights and also the empirical insight gained in the past in linguistic anthropology, among other fields.
Yeah.
But really turning that around.
But you can. I think you can only do this by making yourself into the other in a specific way, of course. So the other is not out there, but it's us, so to say, because otherwise you cannot engage in this, activity.
Yes, spot on. That's why the third point of the introduction is about the we-they distinction. That is a hopeless distinction.
Yep,
That's one
sure.
we really need to interfere with.
And just, coming back to Annette's question, doesn't it also become an issue of translation once, you try to get that ethnographic work in all its richness published, and you have to translate the term because they will not just accept having that term the way it is there, and you have to, you have to translate it. And also there, and one thing more specifically, in such a moment of translation, I would be curious to hear your thoughts. So if you think of academia as a global field with English as the dominant language, and then let's call them in the terms of Wallerstein, semi-peripheral regions like the Netherlands that are well endowed, relatively close to the center, let's say, of the field, as opposed to regions which are further away from the center, real peripheries. So does it matter then where, as a researcher, you are based? Does it matter if you would be, Ahmad, if you do this as a researcher based in Amsterdam, or if you would do it as a researcher based in Tunisia?
I think, well, there seem to be two issues right here, and the first one, the issue of how do we do that actually. I think our volume is a good example that yes, it can be done. Sage did publish in the end and did not reject the proposal. One of my favorite moments in working on this book was discussing with Anna-Marie and with John how we're going to incorporate, how we're going to use the original terms, right? And immediately the decision was made, they will be printed in original language, in the original script. They will be part of it. And then transliterations, inclinations, that also was a headache. We discussed, we worked through it. It's possible. It's an added work, but it's doable. So just wanted to say that to the first part of the question.
Adding to that, and then Ahmad can have some time to think about how she wants to put in, is that of course it would be too easy to be romantic about we just write what we write and we get published in the sociological review or wherever we want to get published. And I think in as far as we, for instance, write grants, we need good editors. And I could not have edited this book alone. Let me be also really frank on that. John Law, who's a native speaker of English, put a lot of work in helping the many non-native speakers in polishing their text, and not just around the pivotal words. I mean, because the problem is not just in the pivotal words, it's in all kind of weird requirements of this imperialist language. So that is an ongoing thing. I mean, it's and just romantically think, well, I could publish in Dutch if I want to, and I can. But if you want to publish in English, you have to go through the loop. And of course, institutionally, that is much easier for somebody in the Netherlands than for somebody who is in Cameroon or Bangladesh, if only because of the money involved and of the research grants we may have access to that they wouldn't, and other kind of institutional support. Let's also not be naive about that. But all those structural inequalities don't disappear because, let alone because of a book of this. But I also think that by showing how difficult it already is from the Dutch, I would hope that that offers some support and inspiration for in my particular case, for people who have 25 of these kind of struggles to handle. If I show that my one struggle is already so large, it's also meant to be, how to say that, inspiration and giving heart to others who are to take courage from.
Ahmad, any thoughts on this?
Yes, I have a bit of a hard time answering or going into this issue, I must say. So on the one hand, we are talking about the structural inequalities, you know, that have been addressed. And also the structural inequalities within academia, like who can publish, and names matter, networks matter, all these kind of things, of course, matter. But I'm also thinking content-wise. I mean, what is it actually that we are on about? I mean, I am really interested in this kind of work because of the methodological shift that it makes possible. You know, how can it really push our thinking? How can it afford other ways of speaking, other ways of narrating an issue? So that is really what it is about. And then, of course, I'm also soul searching. Is this a privileged position? I mean, is it because I am in Amsterdam that I don't have to do other kinds of fights and other kinds of sociological research, anthropological research, that I can be working on these issues? I mean, I feel also, you know, well equipped to be able to ask these kind of questions. So you see, the structural injustice comes also into that. But yes, really, it is not about throwing in as many words as possible, but really thinking very hard, like, what are interesting words that in another language that might help us think differently about certain kind of issues and produce different kinds of narratives or stories about them. So that would be really that is my interest in this book and in this project.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are there any other things that you would like to have on the table? And you, as in the most plural people in the audience, our panelists of today, because otherwise, I mean, it is 6:15 almost. There are at this moment no new questions from the audience. The number of participants is slightly going down. It is very warm and hot weather. Amade already told me that she has been all day inside. I have been all day inside. I think it holds for many of us. It is time to go outside. So I would like to wrap up this event for today. Maybe it was a little bit on a sobering note at the very end, but I really would like to emphasize again how inspiring so many of the contributions to this book is, and how what I think is really an accomplishment is that out of this tension, something creative and productive is just published here in this book. So again, to all the people in the audience, I can highly recommend reading it. And I am 100% sure, if you do research yourself, that this is also a way of moving forward and thinking through the terms that you are using and make them your terms. With that, I would like to thank all of you, thank the audience, thank the panelists of today, and I wish you a very warm and humid evening still to come.
Thank you, Olaf, for guiding us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.